Hey everybody, it's Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. Here we are in the middle of season 3, where we've been recording some of the top rainmakers in their industries all across the globe and in all different industries. It's been super fun. And in this episode, I've got Brent Atkins. Brent is Senior VP of Business Development for Progyny. They're a company that focuses on fertility benefits. So I think what's really neat about Brenton is he's got amazing skills around business development and helping others in a very strategic way. But what's really neat is how his efforts and skills can flow through into leading his team to helping big employers and their benefits, and then eventually helping families, which is a lot of fun. And we had a ball with that. So in this episode, we dig into some of that, and Brent shares some great words of wisdom, and I can't wait to get into it with you. Now, before that, know that we've created something special for you. It's called High Impact Relationship Deepeners. And what we did is I worked with a team, and we found the top 7 ways that you can develop relationships in 5 minutes or less. The top 7 ways you can develop relationships in 5 minutes or less. You can put these tools, these techniques into action right away, and they're all based on authentically helping other people. So if you're busy and if you need to deepen relationships, you're going to want it. All you need to do is go over to growbigplaybook.com. That's growbigplaybook.com. Sign up there. It takes about 10 seconds, and you'll get this document, this thought piece that we created for you right away. So with that in mind, head over to growbigplaybook.com. After you do that, come back, and here is Brent Atkins, Senior VP of Business Development at Progyny. Hey everybody, it's Mo, and like I've said, I'm super excited to interview Brent Atkins, Senior Vice President of Business Development for Progyny. What I think, Brent, is neat about you is not only are you just a kind, strategic person that is helpful to everybody you know, but when you succeed, you help your clients, employees, make babies. Like, that is a pretty cool gig. And I think this will be fun. Like, this whole series of 5 episodes is going to be fun digging into your brain, but with the mindset of all the audience, if you could be thinking about when Brent and his team succeeds, more good babies that are wanted come into the world. So like, why, it blows my mind about the impact that what you're doing, Brent, what you're having with you and your team, and of course your clients. So first question, tell me of a time the time when you first realized that this business development thing is awesome, that growth is great, that this is something you love, that, I won't even go further. Like, tell me of the moment and tell me the story when that occurred.
Yeah, and thank you for having me, Mo. I mean, I'm a big fan of the podcast, big fan of you, big fan of the system. So I'm happy to be a guest and really proud to share, hopefully, a couple of thoughtful insights that maybe someone can take away and make their world a little bit of a better place. And yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I work for a place now where the end result is not only helping people have babies, but helping them have babies in a thoughtful way, because there are so many different journeys out there, and I'm sure that stuff we'll touch on in the course of our discussion. But kind of real quick background on me, I cut my teeth on the carrier side, and actually that's the first time I met Mo was when I was on the carrier side, and I had spent over 2 decades working on the carrier side and in middle market capacities and national account capacities before I joined Progyny about 6 years ago. And I learned pretty early on the need for business development because I've always done sales kind of throughout my entire career. I mean, I had gigs where I sold vacuum cleaners door to door in college for a little while, and I sold attendance at solar energy seminars by telephone and newspaper subscriptions by telephone. And so, those are some pretty tough places to cut your teeth in the world of sales. But the one thing I kind of realized was I get great pleasure out of interacting with people, and I love to meet people from all different walks of life, and I really enjoy connecting with people from all different walks of life. And so I kind of realized that early on in my career, which I think drove me to graduate and get hired by a carrier and go through kind of all of this training. I think very early on in my career, I realized that it was far more there was far more depth to it than to just kind of, getting to tell someone your story. right? And when you're doing kind of those lower end sales jobs where you're just trying to try to push through a sale kind of at all costs, you kind of don't really understand the relationship of dynamics, the relationship of the value of listening and some of those things. And so I had this boss early on in my career. I got hired by a carrier. I went through this training program and I went out into the world and I learned my story and I had great training and, I had all these things that I wanted to say to people. And I realized very quickly that talking to them versus listening to them were two entirely different dynamics. And oftentimes I would come back with a problem like, okay, how do I solve for this particular issue and this particular challenge, within this client or within this prospect, or, how do I bridge that gap? And I would come into my manager at the time and I would say, hey, I've got this problem that I'm trying to solve for. And he would say, well, did you ask them this? And the very first time we had this interaction, I was like, no, I didn't ask them that. And it was like the most basic of questions, right? Tell me more about the need. Did you ask them that? No, I didn't. I just wanted to try to solve this problem. And every time I would do that, he would shrug his shoulders and out of the office I would go. And so very quickly through the course of that, I kind of realized oh man, I better be prepared with the questions that he's going to ask me when I come in to present this problem that I'm going to need to help him solve. And very quickly after that, I kind of realized, well, forget the questions that he wants to know. What are the questions that I want to know so that I can better understand the problem that's at hand? And that was kind of one of the first times in my life that I had realized that I needed to have, a dialogue. And I needed to listen and I needed to understand. And just because I knew everything that I thought I knew about what I was selling at that particular time, that's only one small piece of an overall business development process. And therefore, I needed more skills and I needed to understand the process a little bit better. And I think that's the first step in kind of taking me to what I would consider myself today, which is I'm a student of business development. I love being a student of business development. And even though I've got, 3 decades under my belt career-wise, I remain a student of business development because I think it's just such a cool process.
Well, and I know you well enough to know you definitely are a student. It's funny you talking about questions because in many of our interactions, man, you dig in on question design and follow-ups and how to have an engaging personality and things like that. One of the things you said that I thought was really interesting was this transition from talking to listening. And that's one of the things that people early on in our programs really have to learn because, you're sort of given PowerPoint slides and you're given pitch decks and you're given this mindset that says you need to go in, machine gun Nelly and communicate as much information as possible quickly. So, but when you flip it and we realize, no, we need to listen first so that your other point, we can solve problems. So tell me about just your mindset as you go into a meeting. You haven't met somebody for a first time. Now that you have this, now that you're really, 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 really good at what you do, you're focused on listening, you're focused on solving problems, being helpful, things like that. What is your goal as you go into a first meeting? How do you approach it?
So it's a great question. And, as I've kind of, moved on in my career now, one of the things in leading, teams of salespeople, and especially, my current gig at Progyny, where sometimes I'm leading younger sales associates that we're trying to develop and move up. And I had the opportunity to do some mentorship in the carrier world as well. And I get a big kick out of that because I love kind of pulling people along and turning them into being desirous of being a student of business development, right? First thing you got to do is kind of be desirous of being a student. And so my philosophy and what I really encourage my team to do is set an objective for the meeting, first of all, that says what are the, 1 to no more than 3 things you would want this person to kind of take away from your initial meeting. And maybe the 1 to 3 things that you have written down and that you have prepared for are the right things, and maybe they're not the right things. And so the second part of that is be prepared to pivot. And I'm a big pivot person, Mo, and I know you and I connect on basketball all the time, so I kind of take some of those basketball concepts of pivoting, what that really means and how we apply it to business, right? If you have a lot of slides in your initial presentation, you're making a mistake. And I've told people that, and I like to come in with sometimes no slides, or sometimes 2 or 3 slides, just introduces what we do from a very, very high level. But I'm not starting with those slides. I'm not starting with the NASCAR slide that shows all the logos that we have, and the results that we're ultimately driving. I want to understand why we're having this meeting in the first place. I want to understand the role of the person that we're talking to or the people that we're talking to. I want to understand the mission that they have at hand. Sometimes that mission is education. Sometimes that mission is they've been charged by their superior to go find a solution in this space, and they need to kind of understand what these solutions are a little bit more detail before they can come back and make a recommendation. Is this something that they're driving, or is this something that's being driven on their behalf? And then when you think about what we do, at Progyny, by kind of helping people start families in really, really thoughtful ways, there's a lot of education in this area, because folks that we're talking to are generally benefits professionals or they're finance professionals, in leadership positions, and they've got this whole giant scope of responsibility. And I think to have the expectation that they've got anything beyond cursory knowledge of this particular space is a flaw and a fault. And this is an area of care that's unlike kind of any other area of care. As somebody that was a generalist for so many years, I see that. And so asking those questions, kind of understanding what their level of understanding and appreciation of the space itself is a great starting point. And then I am also a huge proponent of the pregnant pause, which is ask the question. Once you get a response, you need to ask another thoughtful question so you don't feel the person on the other end doesn't feel like you're just peppering them with kind of pre-made questions, right? Because that doesn't come across as authentic.
Well, let me dig in on something, because I think you're right. And by the way, everybody, listeners, audience, there's a bunch of research that says follow-up questions feel great to the other side. It highly correlates to likability, engagement, leaning in. It shows you care. So it's that, to your point, Brent, we need to walk in with really well thought out, customized, personalized questions for this situation that are quite bespoke, but also be ready to ask those follow-ups, because that's where you get all the traction. So, okay, so Brent, so let's do this. I want to wrap up this episode with one question. It's a meaty one, so it'll take a couple minutes to get into. But a lot of our clients, when they first stumble into us and learning how to ask these great questions, how to think about first meetings and things like that, they're used to having the PowerPoint slide where they go in and they want to focus on the saying, not the understanding like you're talking about. So be super practical. Like, you might have to give a little bit of context about Progyny. So give us just a bit about that so our audience can understand it. And then talk about what are the specific kinds of questions or the type of dialogue you get into in a first meeting specifically, and then what kind of helpfulness are you looking to come out of that on the back end?
Yeah.
So go.
No, it's a great question. And so, at Progyny, we talk about fertility and family building benefits, but the way we're doing fertility and family building benefits is very differentiated versus what's out there in the space today. And what's also kind of interesting about the fertility space, when I set this as a tone now, kind of going forward with my meetings, and this has worked very well, because dealing oftentimes with, very experienced benefit professional folks, very experienced consultants that understand the world of medical care in a very deep way. And one of the things that I introduce, and it's a great way, I think, to kind of get people thinking differently, is to say, I'm going to tell you right now that fertility care is unlike any other area of care in this continuum that you guys live and breathe every single day. And some of the concepts that you're going to want to apply to your evaluation and measurement of this, they're not applicable here for lots of reasons. For one, many employers aren't covering fertility benefits at all. For another, if they are, they're covering it in the form of a dollar maximum. And then there's all these protocols that folks have to go through, kind of akin to step therapy in a pharmacy environment, where they have to try less expensive procedures before they can get to the procedure that might be clinically most appropriate for them. Right? So how you measure something that's a cash pay environment, how you measure the quality of a network when there really isn't large swaths of managed care networks in the world, is all very, very different. And then how we actually do the service and bill for services is also a little bit different in our world as well. But lots of advantages to what we do and the way we're ultimately doing it.
Look, just the way you just described that. So our audience, I know if you're a lawyer or a consultant or you're an account manager at a big outsourcing or a big service-based company, what Brent just did right there was create a ton of curiosity. So, the curiosity we all know is an intrinsic motivator. It makes people want to follow along. They lean in, we remember more when you're curious. So it seems like you start out with some curiosity and then you move into a little bit more. So Brent, keep going. We do need to wrap up this episode maybe in about 3 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So, but go to that next level and then tell me how do you transition from that curiosity to now getting into the dialogue and asking them some questions. I'm so curious about how you do it.
Yeah. So, and I think what's really kind of, it's definitely a process where you have to read the room a little bit and read the person that you're talking to, right? Because you're gonna speak to somebody who's like, I've been through this, right? And the person that has been through the journey of fertility and family building has a very different lens than the person that hasn't been through it. And so, asking what their familiarity is with this space, acknowledging the fact that I'm sure a family member or a close friend that has struggled in this area. And so, talk to me about what your experience is in this space. And some folks will say, I have no experience in this space. I know nothing. And we go, okay, that's absolutely fine. How about a quick tutorial on some of the acronyms and some of the things that we're going to talk about in our next meeting, just so we can kind of level set. And so when you're getting information on what the current state is, you've got some basis of knowledge that we can maybe help you with. So we can empower you with information so that you can be more thoughtful when you're talking to us or talking to others, right? Because we know you're most likely going to talk to others as you're talking to us to vet this solution. If they've had the experience, asking them about the experience, asking them about how it went, asking where their frustrations lied, will almost every single time get us to the point of saying, our solution solves for that. And we'll show you how we solve for that. But I also want to try to get a basic understanding of the environment with them so that I can get them to the point of saying, the proper way to evaluate this space is in the following ways, right? And so that for me sets the tone for us to get a couple of pieces of information and then come back in with a very, very robust, proposal and business strategy specific to their needs that then allows us to go much deeper.
Brent, so good. There's so much juicy, good stuff to drag in to pull out of that. So the fact that you don't start with slides, the fact that you create some curiosity in the beginning in a very helpful way, by the way, so that you can start to understand where they're at. And then it's clear to me, wherever they go down that spectrum from they've dealt with them themselves to they had a family member to they really don't know, haven't ever experienced it all or had a close friend that has or a family member, you've got a path that you can go down in all of those. So and it also, another thing to tease out for the audience is that you've got next steps and follow-ups to suggest that are helpful to them so that you go from one meeting to the next. So I think that's a ton in this episode. We started with that moment when you realized business development was great. And then you can just see how you thrive in using a methodology to help other people, which is super cool. So Brent, people are going to want to engage with you in some way. How should they do it?
Yeah, they can always get me on LinkedIn. I've got a very robust LinkedIn profile. Feel free to reach out to me there. Can also send me an email directly if you'd like to. My email address is brent.atkins, ATKINS, @progyny.com, and that's spelled PROGYNY.com, a little bit different. But please feel free to reach out to me on either platform, and I'm happy to get back to you and be as helpful as I can to your BD process.
I love it. And everybody get this. We've got 4 more episodes that we're going to drop right in your lap. So make sure you followed and subscribed and set up all the notifications and all that stuff, because these are going to be great. Next up in the next episode, I'm going to ask Brent, what's his personal definition of business development? And I can't wait to see what he says. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Mo back again, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. This is episode 2 with Brent Atkins, Senior VP of Business Development at Progyny, a person and a company that I look up to a ton, as you know. Brent, here's a meaty question. What's your personal definition of business development? And maybe, I'll leave it at that. Just what's your personal definition of business development?
It's a great question. And one of the things that, as I was kind of thinking about this podcast series and how I was going to answer that question, I had a lot of detail associated with this answer. But the more I thought about it, if I had to roll it up into one statement, the statement is, and this is something I tell my team all the time, build your brand. And I work for Progyny. I love it here. I love this organization. I love this people, the people that work here. This place has changed me personally and professionally in the most fantastic ways because we're helping people start families. And the feel good that comes from what we do and day in, day out is just unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. But build your brand. I work for Progyny first. Secondly, I work for Brent Atkins Inc. first. Secondly, I should say, right? And so I talked to my folks and my team about my brand is different than, my junior sales associate's brand. My brand is different than my peers' brand, right? Because how they go about doing their business development might be very, very different. They might achieve the same results. They might achieve better results, but how they're going to ultimately get to that relationship build and be that value add and secure those wins might be very different than the way I have gone about doing it. And so what are the core components of your brand that make you the salesperson that you are? And then how do you accentuate the strengths of those components? And what tasks are you going to put on yourself? And what challenges are you going to give yourself to try to draw out some of the opportunities that exist within your skill set to ultimately build your brand?
Oh, this is so good. What's fun about this show is I don't know where you're going to go. And we prep a little bit, everybody, audience out there, but I don't know what your answer is going to be. And that was not what I would have expected. It's so cool. So go deeper. Tell me more. Tell me about your personal sort of brand story. How has it evolved a little bit? We got more follow-ups after that, but how has it evolved over the years?
I mean, how it's evolved that's a great question. I think how it's evolved over the years for me, Mo, is when I worked on the carrier side, right? And I think the carriers are all out there and they're trying to do all of the right things, day in and day out. It's a really, really tough space. And it's a very tough space to develop, good feel-good moments. And, you've got a bunch of people out there that are trying to sell, that are trying to, uproot an existing relationship. They're trying to sell their value, and they're trying to sell their value in an area where the differences sometimes are very, very nuanced and very, very difficult to tell one from the other. And a lot of people are going in and telling Me Too stories in this space. And so how did I differentiate myself versus that? Well, the first way I wanted to do that was to become a trusted individual within that person's network. Someone who they felt had enough intellectual capacity to help them navigate these waters. And I'm a big believer in that if I've got something that's a great fit for you, I'm going to tell you that it's a great fit. And in the carrier world, I had more situations with this than I did at Progyny, where sometimes you're not a great fit. And sometimes it's not a match. And having the credibility to come back and say, I don't think we're a good fit for this reason, the feel good that you get from that type of behavior and that person comes back the next time, you're so believable to them so that when that opportunity does come up to say, hey, Mo, you know something? We are a perfect fit for you here. Remember how I said the last one we weren't a good fit? This one we're a perfect fit. So how do we make that work? And how do we basically pull that out?
And so, yeah, I could not agree more. And if there's one thing we can build over time, it's trust. The number one thing. If we build that up, really, really good things are going to happen. So let's play it out. What are some scenarios you've been in where you're focused on trust, and maybe that didn't meet, or maybe that meant you didn't have some commercial success in the short term, but you're always focused on trust. Tell us some stories, some narratives, some situations, if you will, about where, something that happened, you're focused on trust, so you did this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that more recently, I think some of those stories have come out anecdotally within the course of helping my team and helping some of my younger sales associates kind of pull along, their career. And, we've got now at Progyny such a great solution that has so much applicability. But there are some areas where we're not always going to be a perfect fit. And so if you have an organization right now that doesn't offer fertility and family building benefits, and they've got some budget concerns, we can absolutely be a fit for that organization. And we can show you a path where we are a fit to that organization. But I think some of it has to come out with, what are your current priorities in the short term? And do you have other fixes that you need to put into place before you can maybe get to address the fertility and family building space? And so one of the things that we can do there is to say, there's a lot of rippling impact to what we do in this space, and there's a lot of expense that you're occurring in this space that you're probably not seeing. And we can help you kind of, figure out where that spend is and help you ultimately build a business case, right? Asking questions of the potential buyers to say, what are the most important initiatives you have for this year? And oftentimes they may not be fertility, may not be family planning, but what likely happens is one of their other areas, right? Diversity and inclusion, employee productivity, behavioral health support. We absolutely have aspects of our program that address that. And so asking those questions and bringing those situations out, which allows us to come back to them with basically intellectual material that will suggest, here's the way we impact these spaces that are a priority for you this year, and get someone to turn around and say, I wasn't going to bid my fertility and family building benefits this year, but I am now because I see the light of what you guys have presented to me. That's the hugest win you can possibly get.
I love it. So somebody could call you, or the inbound lead comes in and they're ready to, they're super interested, but if they're not ready, you're not going to try to jam that in, or for some short-term commercial success, because it may not be the right time, it may not be successful. So you give them the steps to do, they do those, and then they come back and they've got you in as the number one position in their mind because of the honesty, the sincerity, the trustworthiness, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I also think that I had a situation where it's not a win yet, but I'm hoping it's going to ultimately lead to a win, where I was personally working with a financial institution and had just a ton of groundswell. They really liked our solution. I really connected with the HR team. We built a business case that showed, significant savings could be achieved, and then they went silent. And I think we've all in the business development area experienced that, right? And they're like,
what did you do?
So here's what I did. I reached out a couple of times. I tried to reach out with in a thoughtful way. I tried to reach out with a give to get that they didn't nibble on, and that's okay. And so I reached out one more time, and I said, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, it seems to me like you've got a lot on your plate right now, and probably some other priorities that you're dealing with. And so, I don't want to be the person that's constantly reaching out to you to say, hey, can I have an update? I think we've got a great solution, and I would love to engage with you when the timing is right for you. And so, thanks a lot for the time. I will be back in touch. I look forward to hearing from you. I got a response from that person within 2 hours. And so I had tried 3 or 4 times over the prior, month to 6 weeks. Hey, looking for an update. Hey, did you see this article? Hey, selling, right? And then I said, hey, I don't have your attention right now, and that's cool. But I want to have your attention somewhere down the road. I wish you guys luck with whatever you got going on, and I would love to re-engage when the timing is right. And I got a very specific note back and a very specific timing to say, please reach out to us. Here's when we're going to re-engage. And that process is actually just starting right now, so fingers crossed.
Fantastic. And it's because of that trust you built. So, all right, one last question to tidy up this episode, because I've been dying to ask this. There was some other stuff I wanted to ask first. So now let's think really personally. You're building that personal brand. You're focused on trust, which, by the way, number one thing I would focus on too. So we talked about it more in a commercial sense, about from the sense of they need X, maybe they're ready, maybe they're not. I loved your, focus on fit, find out what their most important issues are so you can talk up Progyny's value proposition, how you might be able to solve problems underneath their bigger priorities, all that. Just so good, audience. Just take notes on what Brent's saying. Now let's go human to human. Forget Progyny just for a second. What do you personally do? It's Brent talking with Mary, key decision maker. What are you doing to make sure that you're building trust as you interact with Mary? And Mary's made up, by the way, everybody. I made it sound like there's actually a Mary. But anyway, Brent, what are you doing on the personal sense to just make sure you're building trust?
I like to try to connect with them at their level. I'm a big believer in that. And so if I am meeting Mary for the first time, I'm going to ask her, the standard questions, hey, how long have you been with your current employer? And, how do you like it there? And those types of things. And I always find that, like, if you, again, pregnant pause was something I talked about before. If you let somebody answer the question and you don't fire a question back at them immediately, you give them a couple of seconds of silence, they will offer something up that's generally of incredible value, right? If it's in a sales environment, they might actually offer up what the actual hurdle is as opposed to what they've kind of, pre-rehearsed as the hurdles. When you're dealing with somebody on an individual basis, they might tell you something really real about themselves. And that's how you basically can figure out who Mary is and how you want to connect with Mary. And if you can basically remember that and engage with her in that way, the next time I come across her, even if it's in a business situation, the next time we're sitting across the table in a presentation type environment, I can ask her one or two questions that shows her that I remember that conversation with her, that it was an important moment to me, and that I want to connect with her about something that excites her. I've seen a lot of salespeople come in and be very open with themselves and talk all about, some of the things that they're good at and some of their vulnerabilities and stuff. And I think that's fine. I think you show yourself off as a legitimate, real person. But the people that develop the deepest relationships are the ones that are interested in the other person and connecting with the other person in a thoughtful way. Because it's important to all of us when someone remembers something about you and remembers something about a conversation, it always puts a smile on your face. And I'm a big believer in trying to do that. And I think the last thing I'd say too, Mo, is I like to bring a lot of energy. Hopefully I'm bringing it on this podcast, but I always try to bring a lot of energy. People tend to feed off that. And so I think that's another part of, like, my particular brand.
No, I think, and I've seen you and interact with you a lot. And I just loved a couple things that you said there. Be interested in the other person, like find a connection point. We all know that, well, not all of us, but the research, the literature shows that finding things in common is one of the highest correlations to likability. So digging in, having that pregnant pause, asking more questions, figuring out something they're passionate about and connecting on that. Really powerful. And then I loved you, and it's so true, Brent, like you bring energy to every single thing you do. So with that, as wrapping up this particular episode, really cool how we started about the definition of business development, building your brand, focusing on trust. Gosh, that is just so rich. Brent, where should people go if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can either reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've got a very robust LinkedIn profile. And I also, please feel free to email me directly to Progyny at brent.atkins. That's BRENT.ATKINS at Progyny. And that's spelled PROGYNY.com.
I love it, Brent. Thanks. And everybody, make sure you're subscribed and you followed and all those notifications are set up, because we got 3 more great episodes that we're going to bring to you specifically from Brent. And then this whole season 3 are people like Brent, people that of the 20,000 folks we've trained, my favorite rainmakers ever. So we got 3 more episodes with Brent, but a whole lot of other people coming your way too. Brent, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for the time, Mo. I really appreciate it.
Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, 3rd out of 5 episodes with Brent Atkins, Senior VP of Business Development for Progyny. And Brent, the first 2 episodes were awesome. Everybody, if you didn't check them out yet, watch or listen. Really good stuff on Brent talking about, really in a meaty way, how does he handle first meetings? We talked about his definition of business development, the one thing he's focused on in every meeting. Really, really, really cool stuff. Go back and watch or listen to those. In this one, Brent, answer me this. What is your favorite science, step, or story that you got from GrowBIG training or reading the Snowball System or any way that we've ever interacted?
Yeah, there's a lot there, actually, and there are a lot of them that come to mind. So maybe I'll take some poetic license and highlight a couple if I can. The first thing I like about the system is I really love the walk around the brain. I really love the science of how different people think and different people interact. And I think creating presentations and creating stories that speak to their specific thinking style is so unbelievably valuable. And if you don't have that information, creating a presentation that touches on all 4 quadrants, I think is unbelievably important. And I've used it more recently as when we're presenting, we're talking essentially oftentimes initially to a consultant, and then once we're talking to a consultant about our fertility and family building benefit, we're probably going to get an audience to talk to the HR person, right? And so trying to understand the HR person's agenda, kind of where they come from, because there's a very humanistic side to what we do, right? We're helping people start families, we're helping people have babies. In a pre-COVID day, we used to come in and say, we absolutely guarantee someone's going to run into your office and hug you. Now that's not quite as exciting as it used to be, but hopefully it'll be exciting once again. So they'll virtual hug you for what you're ultimately providing. And when was the last time you were able to provide a benefit, that ultimately does that? But the next level of presentation is oftentimes going to be to the finance person or the CHRO or, someone else that maybe wasn't in the room that's got a little bit more of a global thinking style. And so you kind of can't take that feel good, warm, fuzzy moment and replicate it and have it kind of continue up the ladder. And so recognizing that the appeal of our program changes from kind of red, yellow to more green, blue as we move up the continuum. And so changing our what we're presenting, how we're presenting it, and doing it in a way that focuses on the financials of it, that focuses in on the process of it, has really helped us, sell to the next level. And I think that that's really been differentiating for us, and it's led to some great wins recently.
So let's dig into this a little bit. For the sake of our audience, we'll have to do this verbally, but there's 4 major ways people think. The easiest way to describe it really quickly is 2 opposing pairs. One is sort of a strategic, or sometimes we say experimental, risk-taking kind of personality. Let's call it strategic, Brent, between us right now. I think that's a good application with Progyny. So there's a strategic mind, and the opposite is practical. Strategic, we're focused on fit. Practical, how does it actually work down in the details? The other 2, analytical versus, let's say, empathic or relational, might be another way to say it. Let's say relational, actually. So analytical, the numbers, the stats, the research, all that stuff. And then relational, this idea of how will it impact others? That you're going to get a hug in your office back in the pre-COVID days. So if we got strategic, practical, analytic, and relational, let's go through Progyny. Like how do you actually talk about each one? So then, even if somebody's a high stakes litigator and they're listening or watching, or they're a consultant, or they're an account manager at a big service provider or something like that, could be anything. I think there's something to be learned when an expert like you talks through, hey, here's how we use these 4 different ways to communicate. So let's go strategic, practical, analytical, relational. Go.
So strategic, for us is finding ways to improve your benefits spend and doing it in a way that adds emotional value to your organization. Another way strategic works in our world is the way our solutions are designed to speak to diversity and inclusion populations. Oftentimes removing certain aspects of fertility definition will open up the benefit for others to access access services, where oftentimes carriers will firewall that, because not for any evil reasons, just because of the definition of fertility and the way it's ultimately written. And so removing the barrier is one thing. Creating a thoughtful and supported solution for the male-male couple that might have a very different journey than the opposite sex couple, that might have a different journey than the female-female couple, or that might be very different than the millennial who's trying to start their career and isn't really just ready to start a family yet, but might want to preserve their fertility for future use because they have a medical condition or some other reason, right? So basically creating all of those different paths for someone in a very thoughtful way, that addresses the strategic component of it.
So let me jump in, and then we'll go to practical. I think what's interesting about that, and if we tie it back to what you talked about in some of the prior episodes, everybody go back and watch or listen to them. It's really good, where you were talking about to find out what the organization's most important initiatives are. If you hear D&I is really important to them, you're like, aha, I'm going to show fit with that. If you hear that talent retention is really important to them, aha, you can fit with that. So I can just see how your mind would work around, you're really listening to what the priorities are from the board and the CEO and the SLT, senior leadership team, all the way down, and then you're going to tuck up Progyny and underneath that for strategic. Is that a quick
spot on? Spot on.
So killer, and then you can use their priorities and their words even, which really shows strategic fit really well. A little pro tip on that for everybody. So now let's go down to practical. How do you communicate practically to somebody that really wants to know down into the nitty gritty that is this a safe choice? Is Progyny actually going to work? How do you communicate that?
Yeah, and that's a great, I'm so glad you brought that up, because as we were just talking about, the life of our organization, right? So when I joined Progyny almost 6 years ago, I was like employee number 30 something, and I was salesperson number 2, and we had like 5 early adopter clients. And, fast forward and we haven't finished our sales year yet, but like at the start of this year, we were 180 clients and 2.7 million members. And, we're obviously going to be, better than that again this year. And we've really talked about the organizational life cycle of being kind of like this cutting edge new thing, to now we think we can shift that paradigm and say that we're the safe choice now, because those 5 early adopter clients are going into year 7. Our retention's 99+%. And so we're able to show that what we're doing is not only, working, but it's sustainable. And, and that type of a retention factor is unheard of in this, in the fertility, in the benefit space, not the fertility space, but in the benefit space. And so we're actually kind of changing our paradigm right now. And I think our story from what it was, which is, hey, if you don't offer fertility benefits, or if you do offer fertility benefits and you're offering some dollar maximum, you're doing your employees a disservice. And there's a way to address that has rippling impact in your organization financially. NICU spend, absenteeism, presenteeism, emotional trauma of trying to start a family and failing over and over again, to now something that is tried, tested, proved, and oh, by the way, we recognize you've got a bazillion things on your plate right now. We've got a process to implement this that'll be very turnkey for you, and we'll only need a couple of hours of your time on the back end to put this into place. That's how we position for that.
I love it. And I love some of the specific things you said. Everybody listen to this, like your client retention rate, off the hook for anything in the benefits space, a stepwise process, turnkey solutions, and being able to show that in a Gantt chart or a stepwise process on a slide or something, getting down into the weeds would appeal to a practical thinker. And the other thing I'll mention that I think is interesting is some research that Al Reese and Jack Trout did back in the 80s found that basically the narrower a focus for a solution or an entire company, the more trusted it is. So I think you can probably, and I know you do, you lean on the fact that this is all we do. Mm-hmm. And that sort of exhibits safety too, as opposed to somebody that this is one out of 1,000 things they do. So let's go to that relational buyer. We've got 2 left to go. How do you, I know this is an easy one for you, but how do you relate to somebody who's empathic, who's buying on the trust between your team and their team, that's thinking with empathy out to all of their employees and their employees' families and things like that? How do you communicate in that world?
So I'm going to answer that with a story. So when I joined Progyny and I left the carrier world to join this little company that had a few good clients and I thought a really, really good idea. I was a national account sales and sales strategist at the time, the carrier that I was working for. And so I selected Progyny because I was like, wow, man, there's no one innovating in this space. And I see all these employers that are struggling in this area of, NICU expenses associated with multiple births and, blah, 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 blah. And I went in and I was like, okay, from a financial perspective, Mr. and Mrs. Client, like this is a home run because, you're going to spend some money here and you're going to be more efficient in how you spend the money, on the trying to conceive side. And then once you have these successes, and by the way, our multiple birth rate's less than 3%, we're going to absolutely save you NICU money, Mr. and Mrs. Large Employer. And I was hanging my head on that. And we do all that. But I very quickly realized that ain't why people are buying us. People are buying us for that experience. And I actually went to a sales conference with one of my junior associates who you actually know, Mo, and is a big fan of yours as well. And She actually had started her career as a patient care advocate. She was the one talking to members all the time. And she got into the world of sales, and we went down to this conference off-site at this, in Texas. And she literally had a family reach out to her and say, I know you're going to be at this conference because I saw you on LinkedIn. We live 2 miles away, and we want to bring our baby to you to meet her. And
wow.
And we would not have had this baby had it not been for you. And so my associate met them in the lobby. They walked in, handed her the baby, and handed her a necklace that said "Believe," and that she still has to this day. And she's telling me about this story. And then I met other people that had babies at Project, and I was like, wow, man, I am missing the boat.
Yeah. Your balance sheet and net profit story wasn't as powerful as that story, because I got goosebumps.
We do that too, but at the end of the day, like that's unlike anything I had ever experienced in over 2 decades on the carrier side, and I experienced it within the first couple of months of being here. It was incredible.
Yeah.
So that's
Brent,
the check.
Oh man, that's so good, and I love the story about the story. And back to the audience, that was, by the way, Brent, that was so good. Like I got goosebumps as you were saying, as you were telling that story. It's so powerful. And what really connects that empathic or that relational part of all of our brains is story. And so when you first said, let me answer that with a story, I'm like, yes, you nailed it. And then, and I just love that. I know who you're talking about. I can see her telling that story. Oh my gosh, that's so powerful. So well, we don't even need to summarize that. That was killer. Okay. Now I wish we would have closed with that. Now we got to go back to the numbers. I didn't do my order very well, did I? No. You already sort of hit some of the things an analytical thinker would be interested in, your percent of anyway, you go into how your solution has high ROI, how you communicate the metrics, how do you talk in numbers, things like that.
Yeah, and I think sequentially, although maybe not for the bang of the podcast, I think sequentially you kind of got it right, because we create that story, or we create a story similar to it for those folks that really are like, we want Progyny in our ecosystem. We want Progyny to be part of our benefit program because we want that experience for our folks. Now the next phase of the sale takes place, which is, okay, how much is this going to cost, right? And we do think,
so they're already interested at that point. Right. If you go in this order by chance, like they're like, we want it, and now they're almost like afraid, like, am I going to be able to afford this awesome thing? That I want, right?
How much does it cost? Yeah. And I said in an earlier podcast, like one of the things that I level set with folks is to say fertility is unlike any other area of care. And so how we measure versus how you would standardly measure are very, very different. And there's a lot of complexity to that answer that we don't have time for in this podcast. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're billing complete services, everything a member would need to support that fertility journey, and we're doing it in a bundled basis. And so we're comparing that oftentimes to groups that have a dollar benefit or maybe don't have any benefit whatsoever. But guess what? One of the things that we know is they're spending money in this space anyway. And some of that's predicated on how claims are coded and flow through the system. So there's already a portion of this that they're spending and they're not aware of. Calling that out to their attention is step one, and then showing them a financial cascade of what the impact of putting Progyny in will be relative to their benefit spend associated with fertility dollars, but also as it relates to cost avoidance relative to multiple births, right? Fertility services have a high preponderance of multiple births. And the lower cost fertility services have even more high preponderance of multiple births. Not to say that they're not clinically appropriate. Sometimes they are, but they shouldn't be the starting point for all. And so we're able to show a financial model that becomes a living, breathing document after we show it too. So there's some guarantee in what we're showing, because that is going to be turned over and be part of the relationship on a go-forward basis. And it's that plus the sequence of steps that need to take place to get us into the benefit program that we're positioning for that next level of sale for the person that's kind of looking at the solution that way.
Oh, Brent, you killed it. And a couple things to point out before we wrap things up. But so be thinking about this, how do you pull all these things together? That'll be my last question. We'll finish this up. But I do want to point out a couple things on the analytic first. One is, audience, I'm looking at you, or I'm talking to you through the mic. You do not have to be a commodity. I cannot tell you how many people get into a race at the bottom of the pricing just because they don't talk about it correctly. They're letting the market determine they're a commodity. You don't have to be, especially if you're a professional and you are part of the solution. But even if you're working for a big service provider, the way that you talk about money and the way Brent just described it here to reset from the very beginning, how we're going to talk about the finances is really important. The second thing you mentioned that I think is really important for our audience is that how you're going to connect with this analytical thinker is not by potentially having the everybody expects they have the perfect research paper that will work in every situation, that's got every I dotted and every T crossed, and it's validated in 17 different ways. And if people like for some reason expect that should exist and they can plunk it down in every situation it's going to work, it doesn't exist anywhere. You know what works? What works is what you described, which is reframing money, talking about how this is an amazing investment, saying we will work with you to measure it. And here's a starting point, but the living, breathing document thing you mentioned, Brent, living, breathing spreadsheet, we could say, is the fact that you can just talk in the language of somebody who appreciates metrics and dollars and in numbers, and then create a financial model and say, we are going to work with you to measure this over time. That's what they need. They don't need perfection. They need you to be able to talk in their language. And that's the case for all these. So, okay, so Brent, back to you. Quick answer back. How do you pull it all together? We sort of made it sound like it's always strategic, then practical, then relational, then analytical. Not necessarily, because you talked in the beginning of this episode about how you pull it all together into one conversation. Give us some sort of pro tips on how you do that, and then we'll wrap this one up.
Yeah, and I think we've learned some lessons as we've kind of gone on and matured as an organization, and I think the way we used to position this, when you were dealing with early adopters or you're dealing with a fast follower culture, which, I think we were in the first few years of our organization. And now, we exist in over 30 different industries. We've got customers of all different walks and talks of life. I think what we're able to show is, this is a solution that truly can be a solution for all. But we also know that managing the metrics associated with the business development process is critically important to the success of the organization. So taking a look at historical close ratios, taking a look at what steps are ultimately achieve significantly higher close ratios than others, right? And we just went through some of this analysis within our organization to say, when we get an opportunity to present a network match in great detail, we get the opportunity to present a financial model, and we have someone from our finance team presenting that financial model as the working spreadsheet to steal your term, we close business a heck of a lot higher than other instances. And so getting folks to realize that's a sequential process. You have to create the curiosity to create the need. Once you create the need, you create the story. Once you create the story, you ask for a couple of different pieces of information, and then you build your model and you get a chance to present it. Once we do that, we win more than we lose. And when we win, clients win, folks have babies. That's the ultimate win at the end of the day.
Oh, great closing to that. That's all awesome. And all of our audience has tremendous 100x impact on their clients when they're hired. So we all need to be thinking about that. Yeah, we want to succeed on our own terms, of course, win-wins, but we all have some kind of leveraged big impact on what we do. And Progyny has one of the best stories out there. So Brent, people are going to want more of your big brain. They want to connect with you. How should they do it?
Yeah, so you can either reach out to me on LinkedIn. I have a very active LinkedIn profile at Brent Atkins, or you can send me an email directly, Brent.Atkins, that's BRENT.ATKINS at Progyny.com, and that's PROGYNY.com.
Awesome. And we'll put all that in the show notes too, everybody. So, hey, audience, make sure that you're subscribed, you follow whatever platform you're on. We've got 2 more episodes with Brent. Set up those notifications so that you get alerted when new episodes with Brent and all of my favorite rainmakers I've ever worked with of all time are dropped in season 3. Brent, thanks for being on the show. This was fantastic.
Mo, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I'm joined by Brent Atkins, Senior VP of Business Development for Progyny. And we just had a blast and I hope you have enjoyed the prior 3 episodes with Brent. So many words of wisdom, so many different nuggets that you can take away from these. I'm so proud, Brent, to bring you to our platform. So on this question, really interesting one, I want you to be proud. I know this isn't your nature. I want you to push into this uncomfort zone, if you will. Be proud, and tell me of a business development story that you're really proud of. You persevered, you did something maybe you didn't think you could do, whatever it is. But tell us of that thing that you accomplished, and give us a little detail around it.
So I'm actually going to harken back to a story that was prior to my Progyny days, because I think it helped me become a much better business development person. And so I was a middle market salesperson for a national carrier in the Northeast, and I had a competitive product at the time and was having a lot of success in the area that I was selling. And I had one broker relationship where I could not crack the egg and get that first win. And generally, once I got my first win with brokers or consultants, I would get a second and a third and a fourth. And, because we were delivering on the promises that we made, I personally make sure that we're delivering on the promises that we made. I think that's really important in a sales culture, to own what you've sold, to stay with it through the process. And, oh, by the way, follow up on the back end after the sale to make sure you're not a person that has just kind of sold and run away, right? And that's how you build those trusted relationships. So I had this one broker, couldn't get a sale, a lot of activity, couldn't get a sale. So he sent in an RFP, and I sent him a decline to quote back on his RFP within 1 hour. Didn't even read it, just sent him a decline to quote. Got a phone call. Hey, Brent, it's blah, blah, blah. I saw you just send me a decline. I mean, you didn't get an opportunity to even really look at the case. That I said, no, I didn't get a chance to review it, but here's what I know. I know that I'm 0 for 18 with you guys. I send out a lot of competitive proposals, and I'm not getting, really kind of any feedback or response. So I'm assuming you guys really just aren't interested in what we do. And so I just thought it would be more efficient for me to just send a decline to quote.
Wow. How'd that go?
He's like, can you come into my office next week? And I'm like, sure, I'd love to come into your office next week. But here's, I think, where I changed the paradigm. And this is what I've taught others, and it's been very, very successful. I said to this gentleman, I said, I've sold business with some of the best brokers and consultants in this marketplace, and I haven't sold anything with you. And so what I really appreciate the time you've given me today. What am I doing wrong? What am I not doing with you guys that I'm doing with everybody else? Because I would like to learn what I'm doing wrong, because I'm not getting the traction that I think I should ultimately be getting. And that's on me. I own that. And so what can I learn from you today about why we haven't been able to hit it off yet? And this guy was, was an older guy than me at the time. And, and he stopped and he was like, I really appreciate you coming to me this particular way and asking me this particular question. And we ended up spending 2.5 hours in his office.
Ooh.
And he became a personal friend of mine. I went 3 for 5 on the next 5 opportunities that he sent in. And I didn't win them all, but man, I got more than my fair share. And I created an authenticity with this gentleman to say, I didn't come in and say, what's wrong with you guys? Why am I selling with everybody else, but I'm not selling with you? What are you guys? Why aren't you guys giving me the love? I said, hey man, it's working on all these other places and it's not working with you. So what am I doing wrong? Because clearly I'm missing something. Enlighten me. That paid huge dividends.
Yeah, and I just have to say this, audience, listen to this. One of the probably the most resistance I get when we're training, and I hear this through our facilitators at all our clients, is that when we talk about asking for help or asking for advice would be another way to say it. And the research is just irrefutable that it's one of the most bonding things you can do to create a relationship, to develop likability, to build trust. And then you've got all these opportunities for follow-up afterwards, after you get advice and things like that. So I just press pause in your story for a minute to say the way you did that, you asked for advice, you did it authentically, you did it vulnerably, but you also gave very specific facts. The way you did it, Brent, was amazing. And so now the question back is, what did you talk about for 2.5 hours? It sounds like he said, well, thank you for doing it in this way and all that. And that sort of opened things up a little bit, but you kept going for another 2 hours and 23 minutes or 27 minutes or something. What did you talk about? How did you follow up afterwards? I want to hear the next chapter in the book.
Yeah. So, I think we probably spent half an hour to 45 minutes literally talking about business. Here's my preferred carrier. Here's why they are my preferred carrier. Here's my history with these guys. Here's why I like them. Here's why other people get business. Here's historically my experience with your organization. Wasn't it that my experience with me? It was my experience with my organization. And I was coming into a carrier at the time of a pretty dramatic turnaround, in the carrier's life cycle. And we were trying to get back to being a more consultative selling environment where we had kind of gone away from that organizationally. And so understanding that allowed me to kind of better position my solution and better position me more than I was actually positioning the organization that I was working for, right? It was more about Brent Atkins Inc. than it was, Carrier Inc. at that time for this particular individual. And then I spent the next hour and 45 minutes talking to this guy about his life, talking about his family, talking about his children, talking about how he loves to play golf, had me up at his golf club a number of times, nothing wrong with being America's guest, right? So, getting time with him to just understand him and learn more about him. And that's really kind of how we became friends. And to the point where the same guy will call me now. He doesn't have any groups in my space, but he wants to learn more about this space. He's curious about what I'm doing. He wants to try to stay connected. And we've built a relationship like that. And I could not be more proud of it. I won some cases with him. I didn't get rich off of those sales, but that's a personal victory for me to turn someone like that around, to become a friend. It's a huge payoff of that.
Yeah, it really is. And it all started with guts of actually declining. Potentially winning work, and it changed, like you said, changed the paradigm. Well, if you had to pick one thing on this one that, like, you're and I want to dig deep, like specifically one thing that you're proud of you did. Maybe it was the hardest part for you. I don't know what it was in the story here, in the narrative, but if you had to really pinpoint one thing that you did, and that's the real nut of it, that's what you're really proud of, what would it be?
Vulnerability to come in and say, I'm doing something wrong. I want to make your world a better place. I don't have the opportunity to make your world a better place. And I want to understand what I can do differently to make your world a better place. And business will follow from that. That's hard to do. It's easier to do as you get further along in your career than it is when you're young and brash and, you want to take on the world. It's one of the things I encourage my sales team to do. When we don't win, I think there are ways you can come at that and put yourself in a better position to either win it next time or win the next one. If you exhibit that kind of vulnerability and that true desire to listen as to why you didn't win, as opposed to being bristled about the fact that you didn't win.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was talking with a big consulting firm last week that we work with worldwide. We were talking about using a loss to set up your future win, and just simply asking for a debrief call. They only take 10 or 15 minutes. Nobody wants to spend 2 hours talking about why you lost. Now, your situation was a little bit different. But then just asking, hey, who won? And a specific question we ask as a follow-up, or we suggest is, hey, what's one thing you would keep from what we did and we interacted on this pursuit, and what's one thing you would change? Boy, that gives you those three questions. Who won? And what should we keep? What should we change? Those don't take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to cover, but they show that vulnerability you just mentioned. On the who won question, they may not tell you exactly. Maybe they're in contracting at this point. They don't want to disclose, but they usually tell something. Oh, we went with a specialty provider, or we went with our current vendor or partner or whatever. You learn enough. And then the one thing to keep and one thing to change, incredible information comes out of that. And then we usually suggest pivoting from that to, hey, what big opportunities are on the horizon? How can we be helpful? How can we step up and try or follow up and try to leave with one specific step? Oh, I'll let you know if we have a webinar on that topic, or I'll send you a thought piece or whatever. But asking for the call, asking those for these questions, and then pivoting to some kind of connection in the future. Those calls take 10 or 15 minutes and they're incredibly deepening, and most people don't do them. It's a shame. Yeah. Brent, parting thoughts. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to build off what you said there real quick, Mo, I mean, one of the things that happens in our space a lot of times is we get what I would call no for nows, right? And so, hey, we were interested in this space. We're interested in vetting solutions. You guys showed fantastically well, but you didn't make the cut this year. You didn't make the cut because of a budget challenge. You didn't make the cut because we're making no changes to our benefit program. Or you didn't make the cut because some other priority bubbled up that required our focus and attention to shift away from what we were doing over there, right? And so one of the things I really encourage, I do on my end when I'm working on my own groups, and I encourage with my team, is if it's a no for now, figure out what the hurdle was and what's really, really critically important for the no's for nows there, right? Because we all look at this seasonally, right? We all look at sales seasonally. So, all right, this is this selling year, next year's next selling year. The no's for now, there should be no interruption. You shouldn't be, knocking on their door and saying, you want to buy now? You want to buy now? You want to buy now? But what you should be doing is developing a strategy where you are basically providing intellectual capital. You're providing give to gets. You're touching base in a thoughtful way. Hey, how did open enrollment go for you guys this year? Did everything go according to plan? Did you have any hiccups? How was the experience? Were the things that you've chosen, did they get implemented in the right way? Where were your hurdles? Where do they exist? Let me help understand that, because I know you're going to start planning again for next year, and we were a no for now. Boy, I want to be at the top of that list relative to what your priorities are. So the more I can understand what worked and what didn't work, the better I can help you position early our solution so that it's not a no for now next year.
Yeah, it's perfect. Brent, this is just so good. What a great way to wrap up this episode. So tell us, where should people go if they'd like to connect with you or ask you a question or just say thank you for such great insights?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn profile, Brent Atkins, of course. And then feel free to send me an email, brent.atkins@progyny.com. That's BRENT.ATKINS, and Progyny spelled PROGYNY.com.
Man, Brent, thanks for being on the show. Everybody, make sure you've followed or subscribed, whatever your platform button is with the little plus sign, because we got one more episode we're going to give you from Brent. These 4 have been fantastic. Set those notifications on so you know right when it drops. Brent, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mo. I'm having a blast. Appreciate it.
Hey, everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. 5th and final episode with Brent Atkins, Senior VP of Business Development at Progyny. He has just been crushing it in the prior 4 episodes. If you haven't watched or listened to those, make sure you do. Really, 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 really good stuff. Okay, Brent, in this one, it's a big question. You now have the magical chance to record a video and send it back to your younger self, specifically around business development. What do you tell him? What do you tell your prior self?
It's a great question. And when I kind of think back about the early days of my business development career, and I kind of compare to how I do things today, they're very, very different. And so I think, somebody can come out of college with a marketing degree. And, in an earlier podcast, I said I had done all sorts of, really very interesting business development activities, selling newspaper subscriptions by telephone and selling vacuum cleaners door to door for a period of time, and some really interesting experiences, which made me think that I knew a lot about business development. And once I got into the real world, I kind of realized that there was a heck of a lot to learn. So first and foremost, listen. Listening is so huge, and I wish that I would have learned to listen 25 years ago the way I listen now, because I hear more things, I pick up more things, I can be much more efficient, I can be much more effective through the course of active listening versus telling people everything I know. And I think when you come out and you're a young associate and you're developing, and once you kind of think like, oh, I understand this now. I understand these materials. I understand our differentiators. I understand, what I'm supposed to go out and say. You're in such a hurry to go out and say it, right? Asking open-ended questions, listening, understanding who the people are. Once you get answers to those questions, ask them more questions. Ask them follow-up questions. Mo, something you and I have talked about, right? That basically is how you're going to really learn the best way to position what you're selling. And I'm sure everyone that's out there that's a salesperson has multiple ways in which they can position their product, program, service to win. If you listen, you can be much more effective and efficient in selecting which ones of those would work in this scenario.
Yeah, and let me comment because it's so powerful, and a follow-up question behind this is, it cracks me up that before our clients go through our programs, almost everything they do is about talking to their clients. Here's the starting point PowerPoint deck that has all the normal slides in it. Here is the value story you need to memorize. All these things that say, I am communicating in one direction. And people practice that and they validate that they understand it and all these other things. And it actually is the opposite of what we should do. I realize we need that stuff. We really do. They're awesome. They're really important. But what we need to somehow train people, and of course we help people do this, is what questions should you ask? And then you can use those things in the interaction. So go deeper around on listening, or if you've got a second element that you send, you'd message back to your younger self, go with that. Just take this wherever you think is important, Brent.
Yeah. So actually, there's another one, and it's funny because it's one that I'm working on right now. And it's something that I've not been as good at over the course of my career. And, I've said this to you in the past, and for those of you on the podcast today, like, I am a student of business development. And I continue to be a student of business development because I find it fun. I find it engaging. I love learning about it. I love seeing how people succeed in different ways. And I feel like there's a billion different paths to success, depending on who you are, what your skill set is, what type of personality you are, to ultimately get to the win. But the one thing, and this is a GrowBIG principle, right? The first 21 days of a relationship and how important the first 21 days of a relationship are. And I have always prided myself on not necessarily being an ankle biter sales rep, which is what I call the guys that are like, are you ready to buy now? 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 Are you ready to buy now?
That is really funny.
I've prided myself on not being an ankle biter, and I've been able to be successful by not being an ankle biter. The first 21 days of the relationship are really important to solidify that bond. And so reaching out with a little bit more frequency, not with are you ready to buy now, but with something that continues the conversation and continues a positive dialogue that you've had, I think takes a relationship from maybe it's a 5 after that initial conversation on a scale of 1 to 10. And if you really invest 3 weeks to really truly engage with someone, right? Because we know there are periods of time in our business world where that person's going to fade to black because they've got other priorities in their agenda, or you've got other priorities in your agenda, or you're at a different stage of your life cycle, of your sales cycle, what have you. If you've really solidified that bond in the first 21 days, you can really go back to that relationship and pick it up like almost they're an old friend. And I think that's, creating business relationships that are really akin to friendships, I think is the key to success.
Oh man, this is so good. Like we talk about the primacy effect a lot, research that's been studied for almost a century. And it basically says that beginnings are disproportionately more important. How you greet somebody at the door for a party, those first 30 seconds are more important than 30 seconds in the beginning. And when we think about a multi-decade relationship, that beginning, the primacy effect, scales out to 3 or 4 weeks, right? Because it's going to solidify things or it's not. And to your point, Brent, it's tremendously important. So go with do you have a third one? I'm curious. I know you think in 3 sometimes.
Yeah, I do.
What else would you say? Yeah.
You know me well. I do like to think in 3s. And I said this on a prior podcast as well. Build your brand. People are taught sales skills And sometimes people take those sales skills and they want to apply them exactly the way that they're taught to do. And it may not even feel natural to them, but they kind of feel like, well, I've got to do it this way and in this format because that's what, the GrowBIG chapter says, that this is exactly how I need to structure it. That's a framework. That's a template. And take what you're doing and make it yours. I've got a sales associate of mine who wasn't a salesperson previously, used to furiously write down everything that I said in sales presentations and was just drinking in everything that I said. And then I would see her go out and do those sales presentations and she would try to be Brent. And it didn't come off as authentic, and while she was saying the things that I was saying, she wasn't saying them exactly with the tone that I said them. And oh, by the way, she's a junior associate. I'm an old crusty sales guy that's been around for a while. So the whole where you're coming from and how you're saying things, I think really, really matters. And I said, listen, it's great that you're writing down all of my stuff. But you got to make this yours. It can't be me channeled through you. It's got to be legitimately you, authentically you for it to work. So whatever sales skills you're working on, whatever you're trying to be better at, do it in a way that's authentically you, not because that's what the words in the book say.
Yeah, and by doing so, you're building your brand, building your personal brand, you're building trust in the marketplace, you're a student of BD and all those things. So last question in this episode, and we might riff on this a little bit, go back and forth a little bit. You've said a couple times, and we haven't hit it head on, but I think it's so powerful. Be a student of business development. It's a skill like learning a foreign language, like playing a musical instrument, like being an athlete in a particular sport. Business development is a complex discipline, and some people feel like, oh, I can learn one thing and I'm done. And it's just not that way. If the really great rainmakers I see are people that are never satisfied, always getting a little bit better, always striving to become better than they were yesterday. So my question to you, Brent, is you're really good at this. You're one of my top couple people I've selected out of 20,000-ish folks we've trained to be on the show in season 3. What do you specifically do to keep getting better at business development?
So, I think I take a look at where my strengths lie and what things that I've incorporated into my day-to-day that are working for me. So, for example, just using snowball system, GrowBIG principles, those types of things. MITs.
Yep.
That's ingrained in what I do. Something else that's ingrained in what I do, and this has been hugely valuable to me, is the to-don't list. Especially as you kind of move on in your career and you end up taking on more responsibilities, it can get overwhelming. And there are things that you've got to be able to ultimately say no to, whether you're a senior associate or whether you're a junior associate. And I talk to my junior associates about this all the time. What are the 2 or 3 things that you can eliminate in your day so that you can be more focused on what you're doing? And then I take a look at some of the things that either I'm not quite as strong at, and if I'm not quite as strong, I might look to a peer that is stronger in that area and spend some time with them and learn from them about how they apply this. And again, I'm not going to take exactly what they've done and replicate it for me, but I'll be able to extract a couple of thoughts to say, boy, if I thought about it this way, I could probably bake this skill into my day-to-day a little bit easier, and it would fit, my world. And then there are things that I know that I'm pretty good at that I don't devote enough time to. And my biggest opportunity there within the last year has been my Progyny list. And who are your most influential people? How do you drive better, deeper relationships with your most influential people to ultimately get to this, point of being able to really have them turn them into trusted advisors? And so in the process of doing that, my kind of self-reflection on the year, I know I've got to basically pick up more, devote more time to developing that list and more time to developing the people, because in a COVID environment now, we're on these Zoom calls all day long, and the ability to set that aside and reach out and connect with people in a real way has definitely suffered. And so I think it's a skill that we need to pull up.
Well, Brent, that is so perfect. Yes, that's exactly it. And what I loved about, there's a bit of a process in there too, where your MITs, for folks that don't know, these are your most important activities, or like 3 things you're going to do every week to keep things moving forward. Really awesome. And then your to-don't list is like cutting things so that you can focus on other things. And then you're figuring out what those your other things are, whatever that next focus area is. You mentioned the Progyny list, a list of your most important relationships you want to focus on, deepen. Maybe it's sometimes for most folks 5 or 10 people, things like that. So there's sort of you're cutting things out so you can climb kind of a upward trajectory. I think that it sounds like. So
Absolutely.
Brent, this is so great. So let's do this. Let's close out this episode. Where should people go to get more Brent?
So people can go to LinkedIn, Brent Atkins on LinkedIn, and you can also send me an email personally to brent.atkins, that's brent.atkins at Progyny, and Progyny is spelled PROGYNY.com. I'm happy to get back to you and happy to entertain any conversations around the topic of business development. I think the last thing I'd say, Mo, is, I've been through a lot of different training programs over the course of the years. I am such a believer in your system. You personally and your whole team have helped me throughout the course of my career tremendously. I can't thank you enough for these learnings, and I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to be able to talk to the broader audience about some of the things that I've picked up through the course of some fantastic teachings by you and your team. So thank you for that.
Well, Brent, you're one of the best of the best. And it's this idea, I'm telling you, it's these people, and I'm talking to the audience, not you, but it's the people who are a student of business development, like Brent talked about several times over these episodes. Those are the people who become the best. They're the people who are never satisfied with where they are, and they always want to get a little bit better. So Brent, the impact you're having personally, the impact you're having on your team, the impact you're having on your clients, the impact you're having on your clients' employees, families, like it goes all the way through. So great job. This has been so much fun having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for the time, Mo. Appreciate it.